Hi Not Board Gamers, and welcome back to Not Board Gaming. I'm your host, I'm Mark. Now ordinarily of course I would wear my Not Board Gaming t-shirt with the logo emblazoned across it for all my reviews. However, in honour of today's game, I've decided to wear my purple shirt. You could say that I decided that donning the purple shirt was the right decision because today's game is none other than the King of the Hill, mild worker placement, kind of Roman political intrigue, backstabbing game that is Donning the Purple by Tompet Games, designed by Petter Schanke Olsen. Now before we start, I will say that this is a review copy of the game that was sent to me by Tompet Games. Of course, that doesn't affect my overall rating of the game as well. And also, we are purely concentrating on the solo version of the game. So I know that, Donning the Purple is primarily a multiplayer game, but we are going to be concentrating on the solo game that comes within the box. So without much further ado, let's have a little look at how you set it up and what happens in Donning the Purple. So Donning the Purple takes place in the year 193 AD, and the previous Roman emperor had been assassinated by his own Praetorian Guard. So you, in the solo game, are going to take the form of the new emperor. Now, in the three-player game, there are three potential roles to play. You can play as the emperor, you can play as a senator, or as an heir to the emperor. But in the solo game, you're purely restricted to playing as the emperor. And your aim in this game, as the solo player, is over 4 years, is to try and get more victory points than the senators in the Senate, but also try not to die. If you do die, try to leave an heir. Try to stop the encroaching enemies that are coming into your domains and into your empire. Try to feed your troops. Try to build buildings. Try to stop any plots against you. In fact, this game is quite full of things trying to kill you, dethrone you, or just literally obliterate you. As the great historian Frankie Howard once said, infamy, they've all got it in for me, and nothing is absolutely truer than in Donning the Purple. If you are lucky enough to survive the 4 years, and each of these years has 8 phases in there, and in those 8 phases you will take in the solo game a maximum of 5 turns. That means you will only have 20 turns in the entire game to absolutely make your mark and come out with the most victory points. And if you do make it through those 4 years and you're lucky enough to have survived those 4 years, or if you didn't survive, at least have an heir in place, then you will kind of measure your victory points against the senators and the AI in the game and see who's got the most victory points. If you've won, which is highly unlikely, then congratulations, you're a far better emperor than I have been so far. Component-wise, Donning the Purple doesn't exactly push the envelope on this, and it doesn't need to. There are no expensive minis. There are no kind of expensive and unnecessary additions. It gives you exactly what you need in the package. Now, the game does go with a lovely thick player board, but Tompet Games were very nice and very kind, and they've sent me through this wonderful neoprene mat as well for the player board, which I think is absolutely fantastic. You're going to get a number of cards, and you're also going to get the basics to allow you to kind of complete your game and play your game. These are coming in the form of, obviously, some wooden kind of meeples, if you like. So we have our main pawn. We also have our counter tokens, which are these little discs down here. And then we have a series of enemy tokens, which are the blue ones. We have some food tokens, which are the yellow ones. We have our legions, which are the red ones. And then we have some dice, and those dice will absolutely be important as you play the game. Actually, setting the game up is quite a breeze once you've done it. For a solo player, there's some mild variations that you make when you're playing the solo game, which I'll talk about in a second, but the game takes around about 5 minutes to set up. So within 5 minutes of getting the box down from the shelf, you're ready to play Donning the Purple solo. It's actually probably a pretty good point to talk about just how accessible Donning the Purple is. You see, the rule book is some 20 pages long, and I think normally when you play a game like this of some political kind of machination and intrigue and almost counterinsurgency, then you would be expecting a game with a lot of rules. And Donning the Purple, as I say, this rule book is 20 pages long. There are some variations for the solo player, but the good kind of maybe 3 or 4 of those pages are also taken up with the advanced rules for the multiplayer game as well. So it's a breeze ease to learn. The rulebook is pretty decently laid out. There's just a little bit of flicking back and forth that you will have to do for the solo game, but in reality it starts to become quite intuitive once you start playing the game and play it more. As I mentioned, it sets up in round about 5 minutes or so if you've got things kind of neatly laid out in the box. Unfortunately, there's no organizer in the box, so get some baggies and you'll be able to sort everything out, lay it out within about 5 minutes. And a game is going to take around about an hour maximum, and you will have a lot of roller coaster of emotions during this hour, ranging from sheer joy to absolute frustration as well. And then you can pack it away. So for a game that takes no time to learn, takes no time to set up, you can play in an hour. I think for a game like this, where you are traversing this kind of Roman Empire map and trying to stop these people destroying you, I think that's a pretty good kind of footprint and a pretty good timescale to be able to play a game like Donning the Purple. So when you set up the solo game, you're going to set it up more or less exactly as you do for the multiplayer game. The only differences being that, first of all, you can only choose the Emperor, so you must have the Emperor board. Secondly, there are these kind of little stamina discs, which effectively dictate how many goes you get per turn. In the main game, I think you get 11 of those. In the solo game, you get 10 of those, and it advises you to use the white ones there. Also, as it's largely a card-driven game, there are a number of cards which kind of dictate how the game operates, be that plot cards or be that event cards, which you will grow to hate, or the forum cards, which can really help you, or the hidden agenda cards. All these kind of take a part in the game. Now, the game advises you for the solo player to remove certain cards out of each deck, and that's if they've got these symbols at the bottom. You see this little white one with a cross through it, sorry, with a line through it, and also this red symbol that either says A1 or A2, that's for the advanced game. Remove those from the decks, and that's it. You are pretty much ready to go as a solo player. The final thing you will do is there are 8 red senator cards, senator tokens that you will put next to the Senate, and that is it from a solo perspective. You're ready to go. The game board itself is divided up into 4 regions, and each region has 6 individual provinces in there, and that's really important because these provinces kind of dictate the flow of the enemies and how you move about the board itself. And also the regions dictate as to whether there's a famine or not, because each region will produce, and there's a province in each region that will produce some grain for you, and trust me, grain becomes a much needed commodity in here as well. Smack in the centre of the board you've got Rome there, or Roma, and that's where you're going to place your starting pawn and your starting estate, and that'll become apparent as we move on. And as you can see, the board is then kind of split up into these 4 areas: Region 1, Region 2, Region 3 and Region 4. And you also have a number of things on here as well, like the happiness track, which kind of dictates for the Emperor how things are going and how many victory points you get at the end of each round. You have the grain price, because you will never produce enough grain to feed all your troops. And down here you have the Senate as well, which is where senators will try to take over you. And over here we have the production line, which is where you're going to put your buildings, because you can build buildings in this game which then help you out, either giving you victory points or preventing famine, and various strength if you build strength entitlements if you build monuments as well. So that's the game board. As you can see, it's a beautiful looking game board. So I've set this up, pawn in the middle. So my single player pawn is in Rome. I have 2 legions, and the red markers are legions in each of the capitals of the 4 regions. And now what we're going to do is move into the phases of the game itself. So as I mentioned earlier, the game takes place over 4 years, and each of these 4 years has 8 phases, which really follow in a logical process. So don't worry, you can't really get too lost. And fortunately, they're printed out on the board for you as well. And there is a handy little card guide as well. Phase 1 is incoming enemies. This is where you're going to see which enemies come in and what regions and provinces they move into, and then you will move all the enemies on the board towards the capitals as well. The second phase is the harvest grain phase, so you're going to find out if there's where there is a famine, if there is a famine, and also how much grain you get. And as I say, grain becomes this kind of real hard to manage resource in the game. Who would have thought that feeding your troops was so important? Then you're going to draw cards, and that's where you're going to draw these event cards, and you will draw 5 event cards each year. And let me tell you, none of these have a good outturn for you. They generally have negative effects, and that acts as some real kind of pressure point in the game as well. And you're going to take your player actions. Now, in the multiplayer game, you can use 3 actions per year. In the solo game, you can use up to 5 actions per year as well, and we'll talk about what the various actions are and how they drive the game in a bit. And you're going to place buildings. So if one of your actions was to build one of your buildings, that will go into the production line. In the place building phase, you will then place them on the board. Then you get to distribute your food. So you got the food, you got the grain, which may well have been whittled down depending on what you drew from the event cards. And then you will distribute that food. And if you don't have enough food, you can buy it using the grain tracker, which we mentioned earlier, and the price goes up or down. And if you still don't even have enough food to feed your troops, then what will happen is you will then reduce your happiness tracker for every troop that you can't feed. Then you're going to collect taxes, and this is where you start to earn some money in the game. And collecting taxes is effectively where you will get a coin for each of the provinces where there isn't an enemy. And if you built an estate like this on any of your provinces as well, then you will receive an additional 5 coin. And those coins are really important because those money for any action that you take in the game is generally going to cost you money. So that's collecting taxes. And then there is end of year, where you kind of, that's kind of cleaning things up, if you like. There is some additional steps that you do in some of these areas for the solo player. And one of the particular ones at the end of year is where you draw a plot card at the end of the year, and that can effectively reduce the stamina. But as an emperor, and you are only the emperor in the solo game, you will also get some victory points depending on your happiness scale. Look, sounds like a lot, but once you start playing the game, it flows quite nicely. So let's go into kind of a round overview of how you play Donning the Purple solo. As I mentioned, in the solo player game, there are some additional steps that you add into each of these steps. And if you look in the rule book here, under one player rules, it tells you a little bit about the setup in there, and then what you would do in each phase. So what you do in phase 1, phase 4, phase 7, and phase 8. And then there's some extra lose conditions. And the only win condition being if you have more victory points than the Senate at the end of the game. So at the beginning of each round for the solo player, the first thing you're going to do is place 2 of the AI's red senator tiles in the Senate. And what happens there is that at the end of each round, the AI will get victory points for how many red senators they've got in the Senate. Now what you can do is you can absolutely assassinate those as a move, which is really good. And also at the end of the game, whoever gets the rightmost senator gets additional victory points as well. So there is a real impetus for you to put your senators in there. But you do that at the start of every round, which differs from the main game. The next thing we're going to do is we're going to roll for enemies. So you take a d6 dice and you roll, and there we go, that's come up with a number 3. What that means is we're going to take 2 of these blue swords, which are the enemies, and put them in the 3rd province on each region. So there we go, 1, 2, 3, 1, 2, there we go. There we go, and there. Now, the only reason you wouldn't do this is in the beginning of the game, if it came up with a region that was a capital, and there are different numbered regions for, a province that was a capital, and there are different numbered provinces for each region, because to actually overthrow, whether you're legion moving into an enemy space or an enemy moving into a legion space, to actually overthrow, you have to have either more legions than enemies or more enemies than legions. So of course you wouldn't be able to place that in there. So that's how we place the enemies. That's phase 1. What we're now going to do is we're going to move them all forward, 1 space towards their region capital. So as you can see here, this is descending, we're in number 3. The region capital here is number 2. So in reality, if they had enough enemies, they'd move into there and take that over. But we can't, because 2 versus 2 is exactly the same number. Here, we're going to, the region capital is number 5, we're on number 3, so we're going to move those enemies 1 forward. Here, the region capital is number 1, and that's on 3, so we move that to 2. And here, the region capital is, there we go, sorry, set those up wrong, is number 6, they're on number 3, so they will move to 4. And they always move sequentially up or down, and that is the first phase done. In the opening phase of the game, in the opening year of the game, it's not that much of an issue. As you start to progress throughout the kind of 4 years of the game, yeah, it becomes an issue. So that's not too bad. We've got a few enemies on the board, but none of them can overpower us at the moment. Now we're going to move on to phase 2 though, and phase 2 is harvesting grain. And this is where a real kind of pressure point starts to apply in Donning the Purple. There are 25 provinces on the map, and in phase 6 where you distribute food, that means you must have enough grain to distribute amongst the 25 provinces, less any provinces that have any enemies in there. Now, there are 4 enemies on the map, and that means that I then have to provide provide in phase 6, I would need 21 grain, which sounds great, but you're limited in how much grain you can actually get. You see, each area has a particular, each region has a particular province which has a grain symbol against there, and that tells you how much grain you harvest from there. Now, there's one region, which is region 4, which gives you 6 grain, and then the other 3 regions all give you 3 grain. So that's a maximum of 15 grain that you can get in any one go. It's not though, really, because what you're going to do, the very first thing you're going to do is you're going to take a D4 and you're going to roll for famine. So what you do is you roll that D4, and that's come back as number 4, as a region 4. That's not great for me, because what that means is I'm going to take one of these famine markers here, and I'm going to put that on region 4, and that means that region 4 now does not produce any grain for me whatsoever. So I can only now get grain from the remaining regions. Region 4 on the map gives me 6 grain, so I can now not get 6 grain. I can now only get 3 grain from each region. That's 3 threes. That means I get a maximum of 9 grain. And out of that 9 grain, as it stands at the moment, I've got to feed 21 people on the map. Yeah. However, you can, as an emperor, get to remove these grain tokens by absolutely building an aqueduct. It's only the emperor that gets to build an aqueduct, and when you build an aqueduct, what that does is that will remove that famine marker, should I say, not the grain marker, that will remove that famine marker. So there is a way to mitigate against that, but as it stands, my first harvest of grain on this particular game hasn't gone particularly well. Okay, so 2 phases into my first year, and things haven't gone particularly well so far. I have a number of enemies on the map. I've managed to knock out my highest producing grain area, which was region 4, so I now only have 9 grain to feed 21 provinces. Things aren't going well. Well, fortunately, we're going to move on to phase 3 now, which is drawing cards, and that's where these event cards come in. And surely things are going to work out well here. No, this is a part of the game which is particularly going to kick you in the teeth, because none of these event cards are good. They all have some negative effects, be that encroaching troops, be that an earthquake, be that your grain getting reduced even further. These event cards can absolutely make or break a game. You can mitigate against them, but by God, these don't really work well for you. So the first thing you do is you're going to draw 5 cards. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. There we go. And then in the solo game, what we're going to do is we're going to read them out in order and enact them in order. So number 1, there we go. It's an earthquake. Hey! And this says roll the D4 to decide a target region. So let's do that first. So let's do that. And that's target region number 2. In that target region, remove all buildings and add 1 famine. So I'm going to add a famine to region 2. Which is not great, so I've now looked at 2 grain producing areas. Remove 1 unit from each province. That's okay, so I get to use, that means we lose a legion, and we lose also an enemy from there. And player with a pawn in the target region loses 2. I don't have a pawn in that area. That was 1 event card I got in the 4 this go. Grain import price increases. As you know, I have 9 grain. That means I have to buy grain to then feed the province, feed the troops. And at the moment, the grain is priced at 2 money per grain. It's going to increase by 1. That's going to 3. Now, the solo player on the grain, you want to use spaces 2, 3, and 4. So you're never going to get 1 for 1. So suddenly, I need a lot of money to buy grain for my troops. However, there's something on the board which I'll show you in a bit, which will hopefully kind of mitigate against that. The Roman people are unhappy, so my people are unhappy. Move the happiness spaces 2 to the left. This starts on number 5. I'm going to move it down to number 3. That does a number of things. If it gets too low, the emperor will die, and also it dictates how many victory points I get at the end of each round as well as an emperor. Ha! Here we go. Grain shortage. Remove 3 grain from the storage. So my 9 grain that I have now gone down to 6 grain. So now I have 6 grain to feed 21 provinces. This potentially may not go too well for me. And finally, I'm approaching enemies. So I roll a d6 to decide a province number. So let's do that now. So where's my d6? Here it is. And we have a province number 2 has come up on there, and it says in regions 1 and 2, place 2 enemies in the province with that number. So that's regions 1 and 2. So region 1 over here. I can't place it in province number 2 because it's a capital. I've got 2 people in there, so that's good. But in region 2, I can, and that goes in where the grain storage is. Fantastic. And move all enemies in region 1 and 2 close to their region capital. That can't happen for region 1 because they're just outside it. But here we go. In region 2, we're going to move from a 2 to a 3. And as you can see, I've started moving my enemies forward. Whew. That's the event phase done. I've drawn cards. I still haven't managed to make an impact on the board as of yet. All that's happened is some negative stuff through enemies coming on the board, through harvesting grain, and through the event cards. I am struggling a little bit. However, it's now phase 4, and phase 4 is player actions, where I get to take up to 5 turns. So going left to right on my board, let's have a look at the various moves I can make. The first one is I can move 3 spaces, and every time you make a move, you have to use one of your stamina discs. So you'd put that on there, and you can repeat the goes as well. You can take them more than once in any particular year. And this gives me a strength of 2. My pawn has a strength of 2, and I can move it a maximum of 3 spaces. So 1, 2, 3. That means I can then defeat this bad guy, this enemy up here, because I have a strength of 2. There is 1 on this particular guy. There's only 1 of them there. That means I defeat him. So I put him back in the box. I then take a number of these glory die equal to the amount of enemies I've actually defeated. I've only defeated 1. So let's roll that. And there we go. That's given me 2 pips on there. That means I get an additional 2 coins. 1, 2. So let's put 5, put 3 back. There we go. So I've increased my coin usage. Now on these glory die, you roll a number of these depending on how many enemies you defeat, up to a maximum of 4. If they're pips, that's how many cards you get. If it's a red P, that means you get an additional plot card. And if it's the circle, what happens is, if you have any used stamina down here, you can move one of them back up onto your unused stamina, effectively prolonging the life of your emperor. So that's that particular one. Or maybe I wanted to bribe a senator. This is where this senate comes into play here. There's a real benefit in having the rightmost senator in terms of getting victory points. If I bribe them, what I will do is I will pay the number of senators, the number of senators plus 1. So there's 2 senators there. I will then pay 3 coins out, and I would put one of my tokens in there and stop the march of the red senators. So there's a real benefit in doing that. Or maybe I want to assassinate a senator. So this is where I start to reduce these. Remember, at the end of each round, the AI will get victory points for how many red senators it's got in that particular area. So, sorry, in the Senate itself. So if I want to defeat the senator, so if I want to assassinate them, I'm going to roll a dice, so d6, and I got a 4. And it says there, 2 to 6 means I kill a senator, so I remove it, take it off the board, don't put it back in the pile. Yeah, and I also get an additional plot card as well. So that would be assassinate a senator. And then we have here assassinate emperor, which doesn't really matter in my particular game because, of course, I am the emperor. Then we move over onto the emperor's side of the board here. The first thing I could do is pay 15 to get an heir. Now, heirs are really, really useful as a senator because as an emperor, because if your emperor dies and you don't have an heir, that's it, that's game over. However, if your emperor dies and you have an heir, then what will happen is that heir will then take over as role of emperor, prolonging your game. So you pay 15, you take that token, and you put that heir token on your board. The next thing I could do is I could move my legion group, move a particular legion or a group of legion up to 2 spaces. So there we go, I'd put a disc on there. And if I wanted to, I don't know, if that was a strength of 1 just there, if I wanted to defeat these guys, I'd put my disc on there, move him there, remove that bad guy, and then do the dice roll to find out, 1 glory dice roll, to find out what I get from my rewards from that. And finally, what I could do as an action is I can train my legions as well there. So on that particular thing, what that means is I would pay 2 coin and I would add a legion to any one of my legions. So I'd pay 2 coin, add an additional legion. So that's the top rows done there. What we also have is the bottom rows as well. Now on these bottom rows on each board, we have a number of buildings, and these buildings help you throughout the game. So what you would do here is, say I wanted to build an estate house. And of course, we know that estates give me an extra 5 coin during the collect taxes phase. I would put my disc on there. I would take one of these estate tokens and I would put it up in the production line, if you can just see that up there. So that's just gone there, and that means in the building stage, or place building stage, I would take that and place that on the board. There are also monuments as well. So if I do this and put that there, I would then also put that monument up on that production line up there, and then of course in the place buildings phase, what I would do is I would move that down to the bottom of my board down here, and what you can see is each monument that I build gives me a different thing here. So the first one I build gives me an additional 1 strength, the second one I would build would give me an additional 1 on all die rolls, and the third one would give me 2 victory points. The final thing as an emperor is I could build obviously an aqueduct, which is here. So again, place my disc, I would then place that on the production line. When it comes to the building phase, I would place that in any particular area that potentially has a famine token. So I wanted to get rid of this famine token here. I'll place that building there. That would remove that famine token, and suddenly that would give me those 6 grains potentially available to me next time. And those are the actions that you can take each and every turn. As I say, you can take a maximum of 5 actions on the solo game. The key thing to remember is once you've taken those actions, so if I've taken 5, you move those stamina down to your use stamina. That's it, you cannot use them again. There's a couple of card actions that allow you to do, maybe get some of that back, but in reality they're done. Once you've used all 10 of those, your emperor dies. That's it. So getting this heir token is absolutely paramount to kind of prolonging the game, making sure that each and every game you have a successor, because if your emperor dies, that's it, that's game over. So you can see that donning the purple becomes this real game of kind of action and consequences. The actions that you choose all have consequences, and those consequences are in terms of whether you actually sacrifice one move to make another, or whether you're planning strategically for the long game or tactically to allow for the kind of dynamic shifts on the map with enemies and the event cards, etc. So once we've done our player actions, we then move on to the place building. So that's any buildings that I built, be that estates, monuments, or aqueducts. I'd then place them on the map. Of course, estates grant me extra money. Monuments grant me some extra power, and the aqueducts get rid of famine tokens. Then we move on to the distribute food phase. Now, we know I made a little mistake earlier. I forgot about 3 grain, but I did also get 3 grain knocked off me. So I've got a total of 9 grain. I have, out of the 25 provinces on the map, 4 of them have bad guys on there. That means I have 21 mouths to feed. That means there are 12 grains that I don't account for, and I have to feed everybody. So the only way I can do that is by buying grain, and we have the import tracker, grain price tracker up there. It's currently set at 3. Now, I could have used a plot card to move that down to a 2, or I could have used one of these forum cards. Now, these come out, one of these comes out each and every turn, and on this particular one, it would allow me to play a stamina token on there, which I wouldn't be able to use again, and that would reduce the grain price down to 2. So that would mean that for the 12 I got left, I would have to pay 24 coins to actually feed the rest of the troops. If I managed to do that, I would move the happiness tracker 1 space to the right. If I didn't manage to do that, for every troop I couldn't feed and every province I couldn't feed, I would move the happiness tracker 1 space to the left. The further to the left you move it all the way, the emperor is going to die. Let's make sure you've got an heir in place and you bought that heir token. So now you can see the real interplay in what you've got to do. Manage money, manage grains, manage happiness, get the buildings on there, make sure you've got an heir in place, and fight troops. There is so much going on in this game. Once you've done that, you collect taxes, so you would get money for each of the provinces that doesn't have an enemy in there, and then you would get an additional 5 for any estates that you have on there. Now, in the solo game and that particular phase, what you'd also do is you would place 2 victory point tokens next to the AI, the Senate, for every red Senate building that was in the Senate there. So that's how the AI starts building up their victory points. And finally, you get to your end of year. Now, at the end of year, generally that is kind of just tidying things up and moving on for the next year, moving the token down, etc. And if you're an emperor, you're going to get victory points based on where you are on the happiness track. However, in the solo game, what you're going to do is you're going to draw the top plot card, and down here you have a strength number. Okay, so that's a strength of 3. You're going to decide before you draw that as to whether you want to use one of your strengths on your plot cards that you have. So you may have 1, 2, 3, you may have none. So say I want to do that and I choose this one which has a strength of 3. I wouldn't know what this plot card was. Now, if I didn't choose one of my plot cards and I just drew that from the top of that pile, that 3 meant that I would then lose 3 stamina tokens. They would move to the use pile. And as you know, when you use all your stamina tokens, that's it. The Emperor dies. So that happens at the end of every year as well in the solo game. So these are mild changes. And that would be year 1 done. You would then move it on to year 2. You would add your 2 Senate tokens into the Senate there. And then you would roll to place troops and move troops. And you would also draw a new forum card as well. That is how you play the game of donning the purple. You do that over 4 years, maximum of 20 goes. If by the end of it you survived, you managed to get your heirs in place, so when your emperor's died, you've got a new one there, and you got more points, victory points, than the AI has got in from the Senate, that's it, you've won. I think I played the game about 8 times now, and I have not won once. So let's talk about the difficulty then. As you can see, for a game that's quite compact in size, there is a lot of decision space in here. And I think the more that you play the solo game, what happens is you start to realise how much this was designed as a 3-player game as opposed to a solo game. Now, don't get me wrong, the solo rules do not feel tacked on. But they also don't feel quite fully developed. There's a lot of things here that really make it difficult to mitigate against for the solo game. Let's start with the event cards, first of all. There's a couple of things about the event cards. Well, first of all, obviously they're pretty damning all the time. Everything that happens in there is pretty damning. Now, you draw 5 out, and as a solo player, in that first round, when you draw 5 out, that can almost be the death of your game. There are ways to kind of avoid that if necessary. You can reduce the difficulty. Maybe you only draw 3 out, or you draw 4 out, and just while you're starting to learn the game, but that's okay. However, the deck of event cards is relatively slim, as you can see, and after a while they just start to feel a little bit too familiar. There doesn't seem to be enough variety in there. You'll start to get used to exactly how many earthquake cards are out there, or how many, I don't know, increase the grain price up or down by 1 cards are in there, and therefore you can start to think about the chances of getting those particular cards out again, and it can start to impact your gameplay a little bit there. I would like to see more variety in that, and also they're not purely bespoke to the solo deck, so what they do is they remove some of the purely kind of competitive ones, but the others in there, things like increase or decrease the grain tracker 1 space up or down. As a solo player, you're only ever going to want to decrease that. There's no reason to increase it, so it would be nice to see a bespoke set of event cards on there. So that kind of takes away from the solo game. The fact that no matter what you do, sometimes you don't exactly feel like you're in a position where you are actively moving towards winning the game. It's just slightly too luck-based because of the lack of variety in those event cards and the fact that they're not a true solo deck. And I think that kind of can be carried over to the full solo experience itself. The 3-player game is a game of political machinations and backstabbing and treachery. That doesn't come across in the solo game. I think what you get in the solo game is a nice puzzle, a dynamic puzzle that will change each and every time you play it, and it's something that is never anything less than a joy to play. Now, don't get me wrong, I've lost every game I've played so far. I've been close. I've been within 2 or 3 points of actually victory points of beating the AI, but I still haven't won. There have been times when I felt absolutely cheated from that, but those tended to be the earlier games where I potentially didn't have strategies built up in how I could mitigate things. The more I've played it, the more I feel like I'm slightly in control. But I think the game does potentially miss out on having some sort of dynamic AI in the game. I mean, in reality, the timer is the 4 years. The Senate is building up nicely with its red tokens in terms of AI on there. It's going to decrease your amount of available stamina by using the plot card mechanism at the end of year 8, the event deck is going to try and work against you, but there's no real AI. You're playing against the game, so whilst not a point scoring game, it's not a beat your own score game, it is a beat an AI score. The AI isn't dynamic, and I feel that there's potentially something more here, something more that can be done, a bespoke AI that would work against you, that would actually work in terms of creating this political intrigue. What that is, I don't know, but there's certainly scope for it. Now, I do know there's an expansion already out, which is the Votes and Virtues expansion. If you haven't got it, please go out and get that expansion. And I think that adds more cards, but in terms of the solo, I'm not too sure that it adds anything more dynamic in terms of the solo experience. So here we've got a game that is obviously, it's had a lot of thought go into it. It's got some great mechanisms in there. There's a lot of interplay and interwoven abilities in with the game itself, and it was designed for 3 players. And you can see that it was designed for 3 players. The solo mode, whilst not truly being tacked on, is not a fully integrated solo mode. It is potentially an iteration of the game, but it's not a full iteration of the game. So therefore, is it worth it as a solo only game? Now, everything I've said, as you can see, there's I've got a lot of passion for this game, but you can see by some of the negatives that I put from the solo perspective that there are some real caveats on this. I will say that I really enjoy playing the game. The kind of things that frustrate me about it from a solo perspective, the unmitigable stuff, unmitigable event cards, and the fact that everything can feel stacked against you, the fact that it's not defined solo mode or a true AI, if you like. All those things, absolutely, I take into consideration. The fact that there's no traitor mechanism, there's no political machinations. It becomes more of a kind of King of the Hill or area control game in the solo version. I still really enjoy playing the game. What Petter's done here is create something where everything links in really, really nicely. It's not a complex Euro. I spent this week, as well as playing this, I played The Gallerist from Vita Lacerda, I played Escape Plan from Vita Lacerda, I played Cerebria from Mind Clash Games, some really big, crunchy Euro games, and it's really nice to get a game out here which doesn't have those highly complex mechanisms, but still provides a real kind of thought-provoking experience. So, yeah, I really thoroughly enjoy my time with Donning the Purple. It's just really difficult for me to recommend it as a purely solo game. Now, as and when we can, post-coronavirus, I'm going to take this over to my local gaming group, and I'm sure I'm going to have like a fantastic 3-player game with people there, and I'm really going to get into the heart of this game. Maybe that will sway me more against the solo game at that point, because then I'll truly understand kind of what I've been missing. So I think it's an exceptionally good game. I think there's scope for so much more to be done here in terms of Donning the Purple. I don't think Petter and Tompet Games have quite hit the mark as a solo game. Don't get me wrong, it's not a bad solo game. It's a very good solo game if you don't mind some lack of mitigation and some of these event cards which can feel like game killers, and if you don't mind the odd game feeling like you've just been a little bit cheated out of progressing further. But yeah, kind of 90% of the time there is something there that you can play, something there that you can do which will extend your experience. So yeah, as a true solo experience, it's very hard to recommend it as a pure solo experience. However, if you want to go out and get the game for a really good kind of 1-hour solo that sets up in no time, that gives you a decent challenge, and you think you have the ability to also play that with other people, then I can highly recommend Donning the Purple from Tompet Games and Petter Schanke Olsen. So there we go, Not Board Gamers. Thank you once again for joining me on this for this review of Donning the Purple by Tompet Games and Petter Schanke Olsen. It's a good solo game. It's not a fantastic solo game. There's potential more that can be done there, but it's certainly worth, if you're thinking about, the fact that you may want to play this game with other people at some point, then certainly go out there and buy Donning the Purple and have a look for the Votes and Virtues expansion. I think I will be picking up the Votes and Virtues expansion at some point, because there's life in this game, and for a theme that doesn't necessarily interest me, kind of Roman Empire, I'm totally bought into the thematics of this game. Everything feels like it connects together. So yeah, not quite there as a pure solo purchase, but there's scope for so much more. So once again, thank you very much for joining me on this episode. This is Not Board Gaming. I've been your host. I'm Mark. Do remember that you can always follow us on Facebook or on Instagram, and that's Not Board Gaming, always BORED. Don't forget to like and subscribe to the channel. Check out our other videos, and until next time, remember that if you can't find anybody else to play with, there's nothing wrong with playing with yourselves. Bye bye.